Caleb, Dave, what's up? How you guys doing?
That's why does that sound sad?
No, it's like, what's up?
There we go.
That sounds
There
a
we
lot
The
go.
better.
lights haven't turned out yet, okay? I'm wide awake. I'm ready to record.
It is 1 p.m. Hopefully
Yeah.
you're awake.
The lights are still on.
I used to wake up at 1 p.m., but that was a different version of myself. You guys have gotten to know me a little bit at this point, and knowing me, would you say I'm a guy who needs more or less structure in his life? What would you say?
Oh man, I'll really have to think about that one.
You've known him a lot longer than I have, Caleb, so you take the lead on this one.
I mean, a little more. Yeah, could take a little more. Doesn't hurt.
Probably a lot more.
I think everyone needs a little structure in their life.
Yeah. So we learned that on Making Chips, our flagship podcast, because for, 8 years, we were just kind of like randomly having thoughts and making episodes, and there wasn't really a rhyme or reason. And they were great stuff, but it would just jump all over the place. And then now what we're doing, which I'm super excited about, is this Machine Shop MBA series, and we're pretty well into it. The feedback's been awesome, and
It's been great.
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad you listened. Caleb, do you listen?
Okay, good. I haven't listened to all
You
of
haven't
them.
listened to one of them. You freaking liar. I can
need
see
to
it in
catch
your
up.
face.
Yeah.
But I think what we're doing here is, or what we're doing on the Making Chips Machine Shop MBA series is often like intersects with automation and what we do on Lights Out. And so the three of us had a conversation like, let's just follow that best practice and let's put more of a series together, So this Automation Academy is what we're calling it. Starts today. And I'm super excited to get it kicked off. Thanks, Dave, for being like, hey, we ought to be a little bit more structured. Because I agree with you, brother.
You know what? I just saw what you were doing over on Making Chips, and it was just, I think, a good opportunity to rip off what you were doing and call it my own idea.
Yeah, there you go. It's our idea, friends. What would you say, like, to kind of set the table for anyone who's going to listen to the Automation Academy series that we're doing for a while? Like, what are they going to get from it? What's the point of it? Why listen? Besides my funny jokes. And
super great question. I think from like a high level, the way we think about automation in the machine shop is changing, especially for small shops. I know I used to have some like limiting beliefs about automation, I'd say, that, it was just only worked if you had a certain kind of work. It was only for the big shops. And I think there's a lot going on in the world right now when you look at supply chain disruption, political tensions, tariffs, reshoring. All that stuff is hitting the shop floor. I mean, that's the reality. And I think shop owners, big and small, if you've been kind of on the sidelines of automation, I think it's time to start laying the foundation, learning as much as you can. And I think part of what we're going to try to do is help to equip folks with that.
Yeah. I think Caleb and I hear all the time, like what you just said, we're really not the right fit for automating. And there's some truth to that sometimes. Like, you shouldn't automate all work. You need to be ready. We'll get into that in this episode. But I mean, how often, Caleb, would you say that someone says, in your experience, okay, for those that don't know, Caleb's like an automation integrator, automates CNCs. That's like basically what he does for our company. How often when people say they're not the right fit for automation, do you totally agree? And how often are you like, you probably need to get over that mental hurdle because we can make your business better?
Yeah, I think a lot of it's when they hear to say they're not the right fit for automation, they're picturing something very specific, and that can be different for everyone, but in most cases, they're picturing some robot loading parts, let's say, right? Just because the industry is saturated with that, which is awesome. That's the way a lot of it's going. But that is not the way to automate many things, right? It's the right fit for a lot of things. So I think half the time it's honestly just like defining that and like what's the low-hanging fruit that you can automate. And I think we're going to go through a lot of that in this episode, which I'm excited about. It's like, what are those first tangible things you can be doing? It doesn't have to be this big, crazy word that you have to spend $1 million on. Right?
Yeah.
There's things you can start with day one. And so I think sometimes it's just the definition of it, right? Like kind of getting back to the basics of what that really means. But yeah, because 99% of the time there are many ways that they could automate to help their business. So
Yeah, that picture in their head, like I can see what they're thinking when they say it, right? So they're thinking like these big industrial robots on rails loading a series of like 10 horizontal machines in a row that are all making the same automotive part. And they're like, we're really not we're not an automation type machine shop because we have a high mix of work or whatever. And it's like, well, hang on, there's like a big spectrum between what you're picturing in your head and not automating at all and getting no unattended time. And I think, as we get into the first few episodes of Automation Academy, the series within the series is really like about dimming the lights. You don't just turn off the lights and start running lights out. You have to figure out like, okay, maybe we're getting 1 hour here, or 2 hours here, or whatever. You eventually just like get into it.
Yeah, start installing some dimmers in your shop, apparently.
Yeah.
That's how we're going to do it.
So we did some research. We had a funny conversation about like this show, now that Dave's a host, and kind of changing the structure a bit and being a little bit more focused and having a story arc to it. And one idea that I still want to see us execute on is like, this is a technology and automation podcast. So we're going to talk about AI, and it would be really great if we had a robotic friend, an AI driven friend that like supports the show, would give us research. And so we were just kicking names around. Do you remember what we ended up with, or what we started with, and then what we ended up with? What was the name of this imaginary co-host we have?
I think we were landing somewhere on like Otto, the sassy German AI bot that gives us little drops of wisdom throughout the episode
and makes you feel stupid when he does it.
If anyone listening knows how to make that a reality, just let us know.
Yeah, we'd love to be able to ask it a question and then have kind of a arrogant, stereotypical German engineer like, what, you don't already know this? So, but in lieu of having that done, because we don't know how to do it, we did do some research. Research is 1,000,000 times easier than it was when I was in school. And I think, Dave, just quick sidebar here, like you pointed out when we first started this, like, hey, let's check this and make it cite its sources, because it was giving us some weird data. Like it's basically suggesting that like a full CNC programmer makes less than a machinist. And I don't know where it got that hallucination, but we've refined it a bit. And what we're asking it, I should be clear, is we believe that automation is a necessity in the future. It's not optional. It's not like, oh, maybe we'll do it. It's, if you want to compete on a global scale, you have to start thinking about automation. You won't succeed. You won't live. You will, survival of the fittest will happen, and you will be one of those extinct dinosaurs if you don't do it. And so as we dug in a bit deeper, basically what I prompted it with was, so compare the average salary of a machinist in the United States with other low-cost countries. I said experienced machinist, and then it used like the Bureau of Labor Statistics and SalaryExpert.com and a few other sites that do like international and global analysis. And so like if the average annual salary of a machinist in the US is right under 50K, then Taiwan is like half of that at 25,000. China, 41% at 19,000. Mexico, which, okay, like everyone wants to compare low-cost labor with, China. That's like what the first thing everyone goes to. Mexico, 10,000, so 22%. Turkey, 30%. Vietnam, 9%. And so like labor's not the only gain, getting unattended hours. It's not like the only gain. But obviously, if it's just pegged internationally and all things are equal, they're going to have like a lower cost. There's actually a lot of skilled people over there. There's great machine tools in other parts of the world. So like the only way to be competitive from a labor lens is to run machines unattended, have one person running 3, 4, 5 machines. That's really the only way to compete there.
And I think another like just important point to stack on top of that is that labor gap, that cost advantage that countries like Mexico and China have right now. I think that's eroding a little bit. I think the gap is tightening up. And don't forget, they have automation technology too. And So we want to reshore work. We know labor's more expensive here.
Mm,
So how are we going to get more done with the same workforce and remain competitive?
exactly.
Right? Technology. And to your point about how, using AI as a research tool, you give it bad prompts, you get bad data. If you want to implement technology on the shop floor, you still need smart human beings
Hmm.
to get the best out of that technology, to get the best productivity. And so, in addition to maybe addressing the misconception that automation is killing jobs, it's like, no, it's a great opportunity to automate that boring, repetitive work and then upskill your existing staff and elevate them into more advanced positions. So I think that there's a win-win there too.
I think I want to actually like it's kind of a one way to look at it is I actually want to see that average annual salary increase
Hmm.
for the U.S., but it's not looked at as a negative thing. It's looked at, well, because we're elevating our average machinist and what they're doing, right? And we're able to automate the portions that make less sense for that, and upskill, like we've kind of used that term a little bit. Those machinists. And I think so that's kind of a neat way to look at it, even as a business owner. It's like, and I'm willing to pay that and want that to go up because the things that they're doing are very high level.
Yeah, you talk about skills. So like our research continued with, so like in 2022, nearly 25% of this sector's workforce was aged 55 or older. That's crazy. As these experienced
Yeah.
workers leave the industry, they're not being replaced. Definitely not being replaced at a sustainable rate. So the Bureau of Labor Statistics, I copied a quote here. The employment of machinists is expected to grow by only 3% in the next 5 years. So like we're not adding as much as we talk about it. Every talking head in this industry is like, yeah, let's kill the skills gap and like do more podcasts and go watch Titans videos and all that stuff. Like it's not happening. It's not happening near enough. So we're actually like losing people. We're losing the most experienced, most talented people. The labor for the people we do have is high. So what's the answer to stay competitive globally? I would like to compare, and I don't think this research exists, but it would be incredible. Like, what's the average shop utilization in a 24-hour day of, US, Germany, Switzerland, Japan versus, Taiwan, China, Mexico, Vietnam, right? Because like I think that's the gap. Like that's where we can actually be more competitive. Is just getting more out of our shops. So
Hmm.
Yeah, something we should look at maybe for future episode would be what are the precursors to that, to getting more utilization, right? And we're going to talk about a lot of those today. And so maybe looking at data for that. What type of machines are they bringing in? What type of automation? The ratio of machines with pallet pools compared to machines without pallet
mhm.
pools. Like just things like that, right? That might be a way to kind of get a little bit of that data without it, directly being the actual amount of unattended time or utilization time.
Yeah.
All right. So in addition to, the wage gap with low cost countries, there's also the problem of shops that might want to address low efficiency or low productivity within their business. They want to be more competitive. Perhaps there's an ROI opportunity there, just to make their business more successful in
Mhm.
general.
Mhm.
So some of the things, that you need to consider with that, of course, is don't automate for automation's sake or because it's cool, because it's trendy. Tie that back to a specific business objective that you're trying to reach.
So we always say at our company, don't make the metric the measure. And what we mean by that is like what you measure your business on should be real business results. Like basically if it doesn't connect to your profitability or the growth of your business, like don't focus too much on one metric without connecting it to the result. So if it's like, yeah, all we're focused on is unattended hours and you don't have your process dialed in and you're creating 5 times more scrap than you were, yeah, you're hitting that metric, but that shouldn't be the measure. The metric should lead to the measure, which is, better operating profit or something that makes your business more valuable.
Yeah, absolutely agreed. And, in addition to that, I think there's just a reality that machine shops in America they shouldn't have to struggle, right? We have the skills, we have the technology. Maybe what we need more of is just an understanding of how to apply those things in a way that helps manufacturers win. And that's ultimately our goal, having these discussions.
Yeah, this is the land of opportunity. People say that in the United States and Canada too. Maybe even Dave. Maybe
Yeah.
maybe
Awkward.
maybe it goes
Canadian
north
in the
of the
room.
border. But yeah, it really is. I mean, we have within a 100-mile radius of pretty much most shops, you're going to find companies that are there to support you with automation. Where you can call us if you want help. Like there's just resources available and technology available in our country and smart people to help you. So it's very possible. That's why it's so frustrating for us when people get locked into the, we've always done it this way, or we're not the right shop for that, because like they're only thinking about the next 3 months or 6 months, and they're really not going to survive with that mentality long term. So,
well, and I mean, ultimately, guys, like Caleb, Nick, what's at stake here? Like, why do we believe this is so important? What happens to shops that are ignorant of this, either willfully or just because they don't know? What happens if they don't adapt with the changes in technology?
I mean, not to stretch it, this isn't even a stretch to say, but like it's a matter of national security. Like our manufacturing base shrinks and becomes less competitive globally. You need to make things to have a strong nation economically, from a military perspective. So yeah, it's bad for our country. It's bad for future generations. It's bad for our economy. It's bad for our pocketbook, our communities. There's a lot more at stake than just one little machine shop. There's a whole integrated ecosystem of manufacturing that needs to be strong and competitive. And I will use the word North America for you, Dave, to include you in it.
Thank you.
So let's get into okay, I think it's pretty clear. We've defined the problem. It is a necessity to focus on this and to start adding everything that is lights out to your business. So like, where do we start and what's the solution here?
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess the question we're trying to answer is, what is automation, when implemented well, right? Because if that's not the case, you have just super expensive paperweights.
Mm-hmm.
But when automation is done well, what does that do for a business? One of my favorite things, I think you said it, Nick, maybe someone else, but it was like, it just moves the bottleneck somewhere else.
Yeah.
In a sense that automation is a component within a workflow. And so if that bottleneck is your production, well, now you have a new bottleneck because you've solved that with automation, and now you can go to solve the next challenge. But there's a lot more to it than that. So why don't you guys fill me in?
We talk about that all the time. Like if you automate one part of a process and you don't think about the process as a whole, like you're just like adding a bigger pile of overproduction to the next step, and that step can only hit, it's like a hose, right? It's kinked over there. You've got all this pressure. Something's going to burst. It's not good for your company. Anyone who knows anything about lean can understand that. So it's not just about like improving your spindle utilization and getting your machine running all the time. If you have a bottleneck further downstream, like you're going to be making a lot of chips and they're going to be the wrong chips at the wrong time for your company. So I think the point is, as we get into like the implementation and the action steps and where you should start in this first episode, the point is like really map your process. This connects so well to an episode we just recorded on making chips. As we're going through the machine shop MBA, we get to the point where it's like, okay, we've got orders. Now, how do you manage those orders? And it's like really understand your entire process and map that out. And there's some techniques to doing that with value stream mapping, or, any shop has some form of process planning, even when they don't have a plan, like their processes that they wing it. So if you really think about how everything flows through your shops, all the operations, all the outside services required, and how that all flows, that's where you should start before you even like really automate anything. You should just understand your process and then make sure it's stable and clear. And once it's stable and clear, then you have the ability to think about like, okay, where are the right places to add automation that's going to improve our overall throughput, not just like build a pile of overproduction for the next step in the process.
And when folks are going through that process of mapping out their process,
Mhm.
like, do we want them to zoom out, like start with quoting all the way through to fulfillment and shipping, like really look at the whole process?
I mean, I would say, yeah, that's a best practice, and you can hear about that more on making chips. Like, if you're jumping over to this series from there, like, you should already be sold on that, and you should already have that done. Because I think there's a point that you're making there too, Dave. Like, automation isn't just like the physical loading and unloading and like moving a material through a shop. Like,
Hmm.
I mean, in your role, there's a lot of automation in the software side. There's so much automation that Caleb and I have utilized on the pre-customer side of the business. Like,
Yeah.
but I would start by like making sure you have a mapped process that you can do manually, and then figure out like, okay, where can automation really like make improvements from that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think that lends to hardware automation and software automation alike. I mean, these days there's automation for quoting, CAM programming, et cetera, which are, you know, I think equally significant in many regards as robot loaders, bar feeders, and making sure that you got the shop floor hardware piece as well.
Mm-hmm. Shops that don't have a clear defined process don't have clear defined standards. Standards are something that's essential for automating. So, I mean, Caleb, you're the automation engineer of the group. Talk about like someone gives you a task. Hey, can you automate this entire process? And what are some of the questions you start to ask to figure out if it's even feasible to add automation?
Yeah, so let's say that the value is there, right? And we'll talk about more of those KPIs and what to look at in a second if it even makes sense, and what areas to hit on that low hanging fruit. But if it does, like Dave and Nick were just talking about, you guys were just talking about, setting that stable process. It doesn't make sense to build anything extra on something that isn't stable already. So that is across the board, everything you do. That's from, standardized programming using macros. It's from consistent tooling. It's your work holding and fixturing. Good example there is we have a customer who we're doing some work holding for who came in and said, "Hey, I want to, make sure my machine door isn't open as much,
Mhm.
right?" And they're setting up the machine in the vertical right now, right? And so we're like, from a work holding perspective, yeah, 0 point makes a lot of sense to have a system where we have a fixture on the outside and inside, and we kind of, do the exchange,
Bring
right?
that
So they
setup
give a quick
external
thing.
to the machine so it can be running while you're getting the next job set up. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. So, that's square one. But then we started looking at details of their cycle times, and they're still going to have someone standing in front of that machine constantly, right? So then we were like, hey, honestly, it makes a lot more sense for you guys to kind of take a step up from there and automate. But what we want to do is start you on the 0 point where you're moving it in and
Hmm.
out manually. Make sure you feel good about that process. Make sure that runs well for you. That they know their parts better than we do, of course, and so go through that operation. And then once that's ready, then we'll implement the automation using that existing 0 point system. So you're not adding a ton of cost by starting with the fixturing, but you're moving it through a process and you're not investing in something right away that might not work
Yeah,
for
it's
you.
like a beautiful example of like we might say, hey, before you automate, let's fix this. And I think that's just like the
Ex-
natural evolution of our business too. We were doing work holding and fixturing, and
Hmm.
then it evolved into automation because once you have that dialed in, automation makes sense. But the same goes for like cutting tools too. Like if you don't have standardized tooling, like you're going to crash because
Yeah,
the robot can't think like
totally.
a person. It's just going to do the task and crash the tool. So,
Plus, like if you think about the efficiency gains that you're going to gain with 0 point work holding in a standardized tool library alone, just even before you add the automation element, like not having to touch off your work coordinate with every setup, having shorter setups right away, like that's all, more margin
mhm.
because your process is better already.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. And yeah, and we learned a long time ago that I've been through enough of these to where, if the customer hasn't gone through some of that, and if we can't guide them through that efficiently enough, then it's might not be something we want to take on anyway, to be honest, because there's so much of it is like how it's utilized and utilized correctly, right? And so that's not fun for anyone in the end if we sell something that someone's not ready for. So being able to kind of start and be a part of that whole process is really, really fun.
I love that. I think if we were going to do a readiness checklist, it's like, okay, mindset first, because the wrong mindset, like they'll know if they're just like, hey, we just like to find the nearest tool that'll work and our process kind of wing it, we don't really want to change. That's the culture here. Like, forget about automation because you're just going to crash everything. It's going to be the worst thing that happened to that company. And then from there, like, let's say, okay, it's not them because we're not going to even worry about them.
Mm-hmm.
There's people who have the right mindset. Well, maybe they need to start at some building blocks before we're doing any automation. Like you said, like 0-point quick change fixturing that is set up external to the machine, located exactly where it needs to be. It's repeatable, predictable, stable. Tooling is repeatable, predictable, stable. Okay, great. Now we can start to talk about that. So I would say do some value stream mapping, learn those skills, process planning, and then have a standardized, stable process, and then from there move into considering automation.
Yeah, and you can mimic that process, fairly easily. I'll say in many cases, not with everything, but in many cases, you can mimic that with with a few upgrades in your current workforce, right? So, like, if you are looking at something to, like we just talked about, right? If you're looking to automate something like that, you can do that with a human standing there the whole time monitoring it. But use tool setters, use part probing, act as if it is a mechanism loading those parts or pallets into this machine instead of a human. Have them, if they have to intervene at all, that has to be recorded. Why did they have to intervene?
Yeah.
Oh, they had to intervene because there was chips around the tool, right, after a certain cut and they couldn't continue. Okay, well, that shows that you're not ready to automate that portion of that process. All right, so have someone sit there and almost like be very clear that that's their task, is to see how long can I go without intervening. The only action I'm doing is maybe loading it, right? And besides that, if I intervene any other way, what's the reason? Okay, that's our next bottleneck kind of in that process, right?
That's a beautiful way to do it.
That's so smart. I mean, like you really reduce the risk to making that technology investment. You're basically doing a time study without having to spend extra money,
Mm-hmm.
and kind of understand what the exact outcome is going to be before you go and buy a pallet pool or a robot loader or a bar feeder or whatever the case might be.
Yeah, even if whoever's going to sell you the automation's like, hey, well, we'll walk you through it. Like, we'll be a part of the process. Yeah, for a fee.
Yeah,
like they
yeah.
make money doing that. And so if you can do what Caleb just suggested, do it. Maybe even act like a robot the whole time. And I'm kidding, but like it helps your team think about automation in the right way. Like as soon as you do that thing or make that adjustment manually, that wouldn't have been a part of the program, the automation process. Okay, like nothing's going to do that for you when you're not there, when you're trying to run lights out. So that's the moment you would have lost all your free hours or crashed the machine or whatever else could have happened.
And from the cultural standpoint, it helps a lot, right? So we're kind of talking about that too. Is like if the operator, the fear might be being replaced, or like, well, this is, what I'm doing right now, right? There needs to be a clear communication on, okay, this is why we're doing this so that we can elevate you to this role. So that's like first and foremost, obviously. But then also it's going to allow, it's also going to allow for them to really understand that process and have less to fight against it. Because sometimes when we're implementing new stuff, right, they're going to find every reason to be like, this isn't going to work. This isn't going to work, right? So what that allows though is like, oh, it's not working because of this. Oh yeah, you're right. So what do we need to implement to make sure that that works on the next unattended cycle that you're testing, right? Okay, what do we need to implement next? And eventually, they're in front of that machine for hours of time, doing that test run, right? Where it is functioning much longer and you've just overcome point by point. So I think it wins them over too over time if you do have someone.
Which would have been way more expensive and way more painful and way much more of a headache to fix like after automation has been installed than it is to figure it out before automation is installed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I love that.
But I mean, that change management piece is so important, when it comes to changing the way work is getting done on the shop floor and getting team buy-in. I was talking about something totally different with Mike Payne the other day, but I was like, hey, well, I got you here. You've invested in automation. What's something now that you didn't know when you made that investment initially? And he said some really good things. One of the things that stood out is he said, don't underestimate the importance of making sure you are communicating well with your team about why you're investigating this technology, and make them a part of the process,
Yeah.
right? Ask for their feedback on it, help them test it out and troubleshoot it, and, work hard to get that buy-in, and help them see that it is not something to be fearful of, but something that's going to help everybody win at the end of the day.
You could be like, look, we all agree we don't like Gary, okay? And right now Gary runs that lathe. And wouldn't it be great if that was a robot instead of Gary? No, that's actually not how to do it. I think some good advice here would be like, make what Caleb just described, what Dave just described, in terms of change management, make that part of how you do business. So like, okay, you guys come up with what we could call like ondons, or things that you had to fix that would have screwed up the automation, and whoever brings me the most of those and the most solutions for those, so they really didn't have to go in there and touch it and fix it, and okay, it's still going. Whoever brings me the most of those fixes, that's who I'm praising, that's who I'm rewarding, that's who's getting paid more, that's who's getting the promotion. So now Gary is excited about that robot.
I feel bad for Gary right now.
Yeah.
I hope he's not listening.
Sorry if Gary listened.
I think what you talked about when you're investing in automation, and I want to take a step back for a second. I remember when Mike got that first robot, and one of the things that I wanted to make sure we cover is like, make sure you're set up to automate too, beyond just your processes and your people and your culture. Like, what about the actual infrastructure of your shop needs to be considered?
Yeah. So if we're looking at this kind of as a checklist, which, people love a checklist, which is good. We kind of went through this a little bit with stable process, right? So everything under that, from programming, tooling, work holding. But beyond that, power and shop air is actually a huge deal that, some people get it if they've gone through it, and some people haven't had an issue with it. But having actual like clean and reliable power and air is huge, because you can't have your system going down every few hours because of voltage flux, right?
Yeah.
So there's solutions to that for UPS systems and things like that can help with that if needed, depending on your facility. And then making sure you have clean air, right? Air dryers, even monitoring potentially if it's an issue. And then also networking. If it's a more modern solution, just about anything, you're going to want to be able to monitor remotely. Maybe if it's a larger system, you're even going to want remote support for that. All right. So that's something that, we as an automation integrator love to be able to have if possible. That doesn't work in every shop, but being able to switch on that remote support is huge, because we can solve a problem in 2 minutes in most cases instead of a couple hours over the phone if we are able to see the inner workings of the system. So keeping your machine running, right? That's massive. And then, floor layout plans like that, depending on where you are in the country and what your towns look like. Space may be a big issue. It may not be an issue in some areas, right? But I think the thing to think about is it could be very different from a layout you've previously created based on your current process flows, right? And it's actually very likely it's very different. If you're going to be jumping in between two cells that need manual intervention regularly, but everything in between is automated, it might make sense to move those in a different area and reorganize that. So that's something that is, I think, quite different.
Like when we visit the West Coast or the East Coast in certain areas, like everything's crammed together, and so you could actually get a lot more throughput for less machines, but you might need to keep some space for a robot to tend the machine, or for there to be a pallet loader on the machine, things like that. So just plan with automation in mind when you first like drop that down. I just got my just got a hot tub delivered at my house. I've been excited about it, and I knew once they put it down and after they fill it with 2,000, 4,000 pounds of water, whatever it is, like I'm not going to be able to move it. So you got to get that in the right place. Way harder to do later than when you first get that machine dropped.
Yeah, I mean, build upward if you have to, start adding levels. I mean, that's really hard. I will say though, like at IMTS, that's one of the most amazing things at McCormick is like that top floor with all those machines and the amount of weight that's there. And you're like right underneath on the floor underneath it for certain areas. It's like, we were talking about that last IMTS. It's freaky almost. Like
I remember those days when our company was small and we were in the basement. Look how far we've come.
in the dungeon, right? Yeah. And then I think, there's a few other things on that checklist, right? Yeah, chip management, you got to get chips out of the system. That's like the number one
Mm-hmm.
killer of automating just about anything. So conveyors, high pressure, mist collection, just to name some of those. The monitoring, right? Consider a monitoring system. It's not always a necessity day one. If you're getting one system, two systems in, but you kind of want something that's going to work for your entire process, not just one machine.
Yeah.
And there are systems that come with that, which is always good. But if you can monitor across machines, across systems, processes, that's really what you want to go over. And it's not just monitoring, right? It's actually using that data to increase or decrease whatever metrics you're looking to increase or decrease, right?
So I don't want to talk too much about our own business. That's not the point of this, but it should be stated that like a work holding company, a chip conveyor, a high pressure systems, like coolant management company, like why are they so focused on automation? Because like those are the things that kill it. And if that's not sorted out, nothing else matters with automation. So you really got to consider. I loved your example of like any intervention you would have to make, it won't be made without you. So you really got to consider all those things and that's part of the stable process. What's a stable process with a person operating the machine might not be a stable process with a person gone, sleeping, right? Like while the machine's operating by itself. So
Yeah, absolutely. And that might underscore the importance of what Caleb was talking about when it comes to a monitoring system, like capturing process data. I mean, automation typically thrives when you've got a steady flow of good data, good being the operative word, because obviously if there's bad data going in, that's not going to be helpful to the process.
Right.
So some way to capture that and understand cycle times and tool life and scrap rate, why you're having downtime, all that kind of stuff.
Even if it's not sophisticated machine monitoring, having a metric, a way to track things in place early on, you can get pretty relatively sophisticated monitoring for a very affordable rate. So I would just do that, but just making sure you're measuring things and monitoring the process. And I think some of that is less to do with just ensuring you're running lights out and more to do with proving the ROI of it, even if it's even if you're proving it to yourself. Let's say you're the decision maker, it's your company, it's up to you. You still want to have KPIs and prove to yourself how it's working, back to the point of like, connecting it to the result of your business, not just being like, hey, look, there's a robot, it's working.
Yeah, so important. Caleb, I wanted to ask you a question just because you kind of consult with people on implementing automation. What do you say to the folks who would say, I'm just going to buy a big fancy robot or whatever it is, and the work will come, the ROI will come. I'm just going to buy the technology and it's all going to work out. How do you deal with that? Because I know it happens.
Yeah, I think in most cases, if that's kind of like an off the whim thing, it's tough to see because what makes you sad about it is usually it's the decision makers making that choice, but everyone else is going to pay for it and then have a bad taste in their mouth. Honestly, just for how my brain works is like when I hear that, I ask a lot of questions of like, okay, what are you getting? Why are you getting that? What are you doing? And it just in my world, a lot of that is like someone buying a cobot, right? There's nothing wrong with that. It's great for the right applications, but there are many applications it's not a good fit, and it's just what people see all the time and know that that's why they go for that. So I start asking questions of what they're running, what their cycle times are, what kind of part mix, how often are they going to have to be reprogramming that? And so usually there's a way to try to redirect that a little bit. But if they choose to go for it, then I'll just make sure I'm following up in a couple months to see how that went and see how I can help at that point.
I want to talk about that in a future episode, like the cobot versus industrial robot thing. A lot of people listening probably don't even know the difference and why one is better or worse than the other for different applications.
One costs about half as much of the other.
Yeah, exactly. And requires, from what I hear, requires a lot more fixing and finicking, and like is finicking a word? It is now.
Finicking?
Finicking with. It's finicky.
What's actually interesting is they just the standard for what is considered collaborative just shifted. I don't remember the exact code for it, where the actual process has to be collaborative and not just the one item itself, which is a huge shift in the industry and a big deal. But it's exactly for that reason is you could, put a chainsaw on the end of arm tool of a collaborative robot, and it's obviously not a collaborative product,
Yeah.
right? Even though the robot is collaborative. So anyway, that's for a future episode, like you said. But yeah, so we were just talking about a second ago about monitoring systems and how that can be essential to your process across the board, not just on specific items. And so I think the next clear step would be to get into KPIs, not just because of that, but also, KPIs, you have to set those at the beginning stages of like, okay, what do I even care about before I even start going through some of this checklist that we just talked about. But then also, how do I even know if I'm actually achieving what I was trying to achieve in the first place? If you throw automation on something, you're not going to know unless you're tracking it.
Yeah. Is it making my company more valuable? A higher growth rate, more profitability, like all the things that go into the value of your business. At the end of the day, like our job is to make our businesses more valuable. And so if you can't connect those automation KPIs to that result, like you're probably wasting your time. But I agree with you. There's a lot of different things you can measure as it relates to automation. And that's a meaty topic. So we should probably end this one and go into Automation Academy episode 2, where we get deeper into KPIs.
Sounds good.
Sounds like a plan. So, we covered a lot today.
Mhm.
And, I think if we're to kind of give some takeaways to the listeners as it pertains to this episode alone, it really comes down to starting off with perhaps a bit of a mindset shift. As you're thinking about automation, trying to understand, okay, what needs to happen to our existing operational process today to kind of prepare for that shift.
Mhm.
And that could be tooling and work holding and these other things we talked about. Um, you know, and also kind of doing a bit of a pilot, right? So understanding which processes are worth automating first, what's the low hanging fruit, conducting those time studies, and starting down that lights out path, dimming the lights as we alluded to earlier. Initially, that could be a smaller percentage of your parts, could be only 20%,
Mhm.
but that 20% time savings could free up significant labor and other resources that are going to take your business to the next level. So, there's nothing wrong with starting small.
Dimming the lights can be kind of like not automating yet. What we talked about with maybe it's a work holding improvement or adding more standardization in your tooling process. That's where dimming the lights can start. Like it doesn't start with a robot or a loader or a bar feeder or anything like that. It starts with standardization. So to your point, Dave, like a mindset shift, like if you don't want to become obsessive about standards and being very procedural, like you're probably not going to be good at automating.
Right. And learn to see waste and do something about it, right? And I think that's a great place to start. The other point too is just, understanding that automation doesn't mean replacing human workers, right? And I think again, it's what can cause a lot of fear. It's doing more with the team that you already have. It's being more competitive, stronger paychecks for your workers, I think is a reality there, and upskilling them to work alongside machines and technology, right? I think that's a much more compelling story than automation's coming for my job. And that's a misconception.
Yeah, it's about respecting and believing in the potential of your people, not replacing your people. So
100%.
Yeah.
Sorry, Gary.
Yeah, Gary, you can go though. Nobody loves you. Next time, KPIs with Caleb with a K. Let's freaking go. But with that, nothing makes me ready to turn the lights out more than talking about KPIs and data. So turn the lights out on the episode, guys.
All right. Sounds great.
Yep.
See you guys. Thanks.